Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Esoterica, and if you can't tell already, we're going to be talking about MARS FPGA again this week, because last week you had so many questions in the video I did, I figured I would go over all the different games MARS has previewed over on their Twitter page, because they keep putting up trailers for games, so we should assume and anticipate those are things that might be coming to MARS in the future. And right off the top, they keep showing Capcom CPS3, which totally makes sense because it is one of Capcom's better platforms. And honestly, if you try to actually buy hardware for this thing, it is temperamental, it's expensive, and if you don't have it modified, it's basically waiting to break, at least in my opinion. But they've definitely shown off a lot of the Capcom CPS3 stuff like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Street Fighter 3 New Generation. Obviously, if one game runs, they will all run, but I'm not sure if this has anything to do with Hotego and his CPS3 reverse engineering. He has mentioned it to his Patreon subscribers, so I don't really know whether or not this is the same implementation, or if it is a different implementation from a developer from the MARS team. If I ever find out, I will let you guys know, but I know there's a lot of love out there for Capcom CPS3, but you really need to like fighting games to want to play this hardware. If you have no interest in fighters, it's definitely not going to be anything that appeals to you, but I had a lot of questions about Capcom CPS3 in FPGA. Hotego's still working on bringing it to MiSTer, but the MARS team has previewed it as well. Now another game that they've been showing off on Twitter is going to be Zombie Revenge. I'm assuming because it's October and it is the spooky season, but if you're not aware, this is a Dreamcast and a Sega Naomi variant of the House of the Dead. And it does seem like they're showing the Naomi version because the insert coin is at the bottom of their little preview. Now I know from what's been talked about, Dreamcast is technically first on their implementation plan, and then Naomi is going to be perhaps an implementation after that, because while they are extremely similar, Naomi hardware is more powerful in some aspects. I talked about that in the previous MARS video, so it'll be interesting to see how this shapes up. There's been no mention of whether or not Dreamcast would be a potential day one launch core for MARS, so right now it is still a complete wait and see approach because we need to see some footage running on the actual hardware. And don't get me wrong, Dreamcast and Naomi are absolutely spectacular, but we need to see it running on the real thing to better understand how this is all going to work going forward. They've obviously also shown off Crazy Taxi, but there's so many different Naomi games that could potentially work under FPGA, and obviously the Dreamcast library as well. Now there is a lot of overlap between the two pieces of hardware because porting home to Dreamcast from Naomi was extremely easy compared to porting home from Model 2 or 3 for the Sega Saturn. So it will be interesting to see when any of this is running on real hardware in the previews from there, because it is still just trailers and commercials for these games. Now another game that was previewed, maybe the first one that actually got me excited as far as rarity is concerned, is Dragon Gun. That is because I absolutely love arcade light gun games. This is one of the harder boards to actually find and collect for. I've got dozens upon dozens of light gun games in my collection, but Dragon Gun is still one that I have not yet managed to track down for what I would consider a fair price. It's also one that is definitely a deep cut. It seems like the games they're previewing, some of them are obviously mainstream like Street Fighter 3 on the Capcom CPS3, but honestly the amount of people that know about Dragon Gun I would assume would be relatively low. They may comment down below and tell me if you knew about this Data East game or if you've ever played it. I did an episode of Unported Playlist on this about 2 years ago, and I haven't heard anybody mention or bring it up since. But it would be a fun thing to see in FPGA. Definitely seems like something MARS and MiSTer could both do, because this isn't the most complex 2D hardware out there. MiSTer's definitely running some 2D boards that would be equivalent, but it seems like somebody on the MARS development team is very interested in bringing this game over, so I give them high marks for having tasted esoteric games. Obviously I'm Video Game Esoterica, I'm gonna be appreciative of something like that. But again, if you've never played Dragon Gun before, you can pop it in MAME today. It's not perfect, but if you want to get a sense of what it does, go ahead. Now another game that was previewed is Pretty Soldier Sailor Moon, and I did an episode on this in the spring. It is an absolutely spectacular 2D beat 'em up running on some cave hardware. It is just another one of those games that's absolutely fun to play in real time. It can definitely be a little bit cheap, but what arcade wasn't from back in the day, but this is definitely one that has awesome animation and awesome art style. Technically, apparently it was not finished. There's definitely a little bit of stiltedness in the story. Apparently the developers planned for a lot more that didn't make it into the game, but this is something that's been previewed for MARS and would be fun to see come over. Some of the hardware that this would run on also goes for MiSTer FPGA. Some of the cave cores are there as well, but this is something that they've previewed on their Twitter, and I did have a couple of people asking questions about what this game was. Seems like it must still be a little bit of a deep cut if you're not sure what the game is, but MARS has previewed it. It would be interesting to see it come to the core, but again, if you've never played it before, definitely check it out. It's a 10 out of 10 in my book. Now, a game that I just recently mentioned on my best arcade horror games of all times is Night Slashers. This is another Data East game, and it seems like someone from the MARS team is a big fan of Data East because they're still going to be showing up in this video. But this is another awesome beat 'em up. It's kind of like the more lighthearted counterpoint to Splatterhouse from Namco, which Hotego's working for on MiSTer FPGA right now. Hopefully it's out by the time you see this video. But this would be another thing that would be amazing to have on any sort of FPGA device, because this is another arcade board that's exceedingly expensive if you actually want to purchase it. Now, I don't know what your rent or mortgage payment is, but I will tell you it's probably close to that if you want an original board. This is another hidden gem of the arcade beat 'em up genre, and it's another arcade hidden gem as far as horror games are concerned, and it is one that I would love to see in FPGA, whether on MARS, MiSTer, or anything in between. You can get it on the Switch store. It is available there, but I believe it's still censored, which is an absolute bummer. This is the type of game you want to play with no censorship whatsoever. Now, moving back to Dreamcast and Naomi for just a moment, they've also previewed the House of the Dead 2, and I just recently did a video on that last week. I am very curious to hear in the future what MARS' plan is for light gun implementation. I know they showed off the controller port on the front being able to swap in different controller adapters, but I haven't heard anything about light gun games yet. So I would be curious to hear how that is planned to be implemented, because you do need sync to the raster, so something like a snack adapter for Dreamcast presumably would be able to use that. But when you go over to Naomi, some of the light gun games there actually use IR sensors, so perhaps it's a gun for IR or Sinjin situation. But as a huge light gun gaming fan, I am looking forward to and do want to know how that's going to be implemented in the future, because you do want to have great light gun support. You need accuracy, you need speed, you need responsiveness, and most importantly, you need a perfect sync to the actual image, or else the light gun sensor cannot read anything as long as you're using a raster light gun. If it's IR, it's a completely different technology, which is technically easier to deal with, but this is one of those things. I have been curious about what their plan is for that, because they have shown off arcade light gun games as well, so I do want to hear about what they're going to be doing in that direction. But honestly, if we had House of the Dead 2 and FPGA, I certainly wouldn't throw it out of bed. It's definitely one of my favorite games of all time. Now, speaking of light gun games that technically aren't light gun games whatsoever, but games that MARS has previewed, is Beast Busters. This uses analog controls on the X and Y coordinate. There is a big cabinet mounted gun on the front of the cabinet, and as you moved it up, down, left, and right, you'd see your aiming reticle move across the screen. Seems like we have some SNK fans over at MARS as well, because Beast Busters is not a game that I would expect anybody to preview for their upcoming FPGA device. Doesn't really seem like a system seller, but it is one of my favorite games of all time, so maybe the MARS people are just trying to convince me to buy one of these things. And if you do want to keep seeing MARS video, leave me a comment down below. Of course, I'll pick it up when it's out some way or another, and I'll bring you guys more content. But if you want to know something in specific, do ask me down below. But again, this is an awesome game from the history of SNK, and it isn't one that I really hear many people mention whatsoever, so it is fun to see it previewed. I do feel like some of these previews are right up my alley. Things like Dragon Gun and Beast Busters are just such fun games. I do have an original Beast Busters PCB in my collection, so I don't need an FPGA core for it, but I certainly wouldn't complain if I got one. But MARS people, if you're listening, if you really want to impress me, show me some Hyper Neo Geo 64. Give me a core for that. I've been talking about this platform for over 3 years. I own a full set, including some prototypes, and I've done a video on absolutely every single game. The original Beast Busters is a ton of fun, but where it's really at is Beast Busters Second Nightmare. This is basically a Nintendo 64 CPU with custom 3D hardware from SNK, and I'd love to see it in any FPGA. Now, they also previewed Trio the Punch, and I'm really getting confused as to who's interested in what over at MARS. And don't take that from me saying that I'm making fun of them. I love Trio the Punch too. This is such a weird game. It basically feels like it's never actually been finished. It just throws anything it wants at you on the screen. It doesn't even attempt to make any sense whatsoever, but you're constantly laughing and smiling when you're playing the game. But again, I totally get why they're previewing Dreamcast, Naomi, CPS3, things such as that, but who probably even knows about Trio the Punch that's paying attention to MARS? I would be curious, but I'm glad that someone's actually talking about this game that is not me. I did an episode on it maybe 6 months ago, and it was very well received. The people that know of this game absolutely love it because it is so weird. The people that have never seen it before definitely should check it out. It is not quote-unquote a good game, it's totally serviceable, but the actual comedy in it and all of the weirdness is worth the price of entry. You get to fight Colonel Sanders, and you find out that it's actually just a chicken in a Colonel Sanders suit throwing drumsticks out at you. I have no idea where they came up with anything like this, but I'm so glad that the developers thought this was a good idea. It's a very strange game, but it's a very fun one as well. Now onto games that even I don't really appreciate is the real Ghostbusters. I'm sure there's people out there that love it, but again, it's another Data East game, so I'm starting to see a real big Data East trend as far as whoever's making cores for Mars is concerned and their interest level lies. This is not a bad game whatsoever. It's a 2D running gun game. It just never really did it for me, and it's so unlike the actual Ghostbusters movie that everyone remembers. You really don't feel like you're playing a Ghostbusters game if you didn't see the actual title, or if you didn't see Slimer pop up as a power-up here and there. But it's another game that Mars is previewing, and if you can't tell already from the video, it seems like they're on a real horror kick this month. They've been showing off different games in October, and a lot of them have been horror themed. Now again, I have absolutely no idea if any of the footage they're showing is running on any sort of FPGA device. A lot of times they show different trailers and commercials that were available for games when they were new on the market, so it seems just like a hype reel. So I don't know when Mars is going to release. I don't know what the cores that would come with would be. I don't know if everything I'm showing you in this video is day 1, or I don't know if everything I'm showing you in this video is year 3. It is yet to be determined, and as usual, it's a wait and see approach. I'm just talking about what they've previewed. And of course they've shown off a bunch of IGS PGM as well, and this is another one of my favorite arcade boards. I've got a ton of games as well as 2 different boards in my closet. I keep a backup because I love it that much. So it seems like there's both some PGM fans as well as some Cave Bullet Hell Shmup fans over at Mars, because they've definitely been previewing some Cave games on their channel. But it seems like they put a video up showing real hardware running a cartridge, which is totally fine. I have that too. But if we do get PGM on FPGA, that would be awesome. I know Hotego's looking at it on MiSTer FPGA, and it seems like the Mars people are looking at it over on Mars as well. But if you've never heard of the IGS PGM, I wouldn't blame you. It is one of the deeper cut arcade boards, and if it wasn't for Demon Front and a lot of the Cave games here, not as many people would know about it, but it's got a great library. It is something I collect for, and it is something that I would love an easier plug and play device for my television, so I didn't have to drag my board, cartridges, and super guns out every single time I wanted to play games, because that's what I do with my MiSTer FPGA currently. I use it when I don't want to dig out my boards. But as usual, at the end of every video, I show the piece of hardware I'm talking about, and I do want you to remember that right now, Mars FPGA is just a photo of a board and a lot of promises. I'm not telling you they're going to fulfill them, and I'm not telling you they're not going to fulfill them. I'm just here to talk about what is previewed, because you guys asked for more Mars content. And if you want to leave me a comment and ask whether or not you should buy Mars, I have absolutely no idea. It's not even for sale, so I couldn't even tell you yes. Wait and see what happens. We'll do another video when there's more news, but that's what I got. Bye-bye.